Okay, so this week we're studying Australia, New Zealand, Oceania, and Antarctica with a focus on climate change. You'll have a worksheet. I'll post it at about 10:30 a.m. on Thursday. Oh, sorry. No, what I mean is it's a map quiz worksheet. So instead of like an actual map, you guys are going to have it be fill in the blank or multiple choice. All right, so it's due by Sunday. Our current events this week. If you haven't turned in your current events, you need to start doing that. This week is Caitlin, Aurora, Henry, Riley, Allison, Nicole. There's a Dropbox for that. Last week we had. What did we have last week? I'm not organized right now. Jack and Kelsey. And the next week we have a ton of people. So Hannah S, Callie, Jorge, Jordan, Eileen, Dakota, and AV. All right, so about the region. So slide 3. The only thing that really puts this region together is its physical geography. So remember, physical geography means like the landscape. In this case, it's climate and location. Other than that, they don't share a lot of cultural geography, and they don't really share climate. They're just all kind of in the middle of nowhere with extremes in climate. Yes, that's really cute, honey. Sorry. All right, so European colonialism, specifically British colonialism, has a big influence on Australia and New Zealand. That's why if you went there, they speak English, they have very high standards of living, they are part of the Commonwealth, which means they still have the Queen. So this region can really be broken down into 3 subregions: Australia and New Zealand, Antarctica, and Oceania. So let's start with Antarctica. You know it as this big round white circle at the bottom of a globe, or a big white blob at the bottom of a map. It also has a lot of ice. We know that it's very cold, but there's also mineral wealth, oil, and gas potential. And because it's frozen and temperatures are rising, it's really being impacted by climate change. And it's a place where people are studying climate change a lot. With climate change, a lot of its ice shelves, like here it says like the Larsen ice shelf broke off. It's the size of Manhattan. The documentary went into this quite a bit as well. Antarctica's big. What am I doing? Hang on. There we go. People are always there, but there are no permanent populations. So as you listen to this, I want you to think, why is there no permanent population? What are people doing instead of being there permanently? Scientists. All right. So what is Antarctica's global status? As you can see by this chart or pie graph from the book, a lot of different countries claim Antarctica. There's one part, the coldest part, that's unclaimed, and then this little ice shelf that was featured in the documentary, 3 different countries lay claim to it. So Chile, Argentina, United Kingdom. And then if you notice, some big countries are missing from this: China, US, Russia. That's because they all say that none of these claims are valid. All right, Antarctica, big, white, cold, and it's melting and getting warmer. Australia, very dry. So about 2/3 of it are desert or semi-arid. So if you've ever been to like Utah, kind of like semi-arid like Utah, and then proper desert for the rest of it. Most of that is in this place called the Outback, right in the center. Mountains, one that'll be on your quiz, the Great Dividing Range. You can see them over here. They are on the east coast. They divide the more temperate climate over here from the drier climate. And then up here in the northeast, we have the Great Barrier Reef. It's pretty cool. All right, here's the Great Dividing Range. It's compared to the Himalayas. These are very, very old mountains. They've eroded a lot over time. They're not as big and snowy and massive, whatever, as the Himalayas. There we have the Great Barrier Reef. So as you're watching this, go ahead and pause this recording and watch this really cool video. Unfortunately, and if you're doing a current event, this would be an interesting thing to do your current event over. It is in danger of disappearing due to climate change and water temperatures getting higher, which is killing all of this beautifully colored coral. It's really an underwater rainforest. They're fascinating. All right, so that's the Great Barrier Reef. So reefs are made of coral. It's off the northeast coast of Australia, the continent. Um, there's also the outback. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the outback. It's huge. Look how big it is. It's all within this green area right through here. Watch this really awesome video about the outback as well. Or it's about Ayers Rock is the colonial name for it. It's what the European or the British called it. Uluru is the indigenous. So again, indigenous means the people that were there before the Europeans. The indigenous people of Australia are called the Aborigines, and they called this big red rock Uluru. Speaking of Australia, let's take a peek. It is a country. It has its own president, prime minister, all that, but it is also a continent. It's considered a continent as well. Antarctica, on the other hand, is a continent, but it's not a country. It does not have an economy or a political system. There's no permanent population. Okay. New Zealand. So New Zealand is pretty close to Australia if you look on a map. But it has a very different climate. If you think of Australia as being very dry, New Zealand has what we call a mild maritime. So maritime is a word that means oceanic. So think about like, Tony, shh. Come here. That's my dog. All right, so if you think about Dublin, like Ireland, England, Scotland, Portland, Seattle. So like kind of like the Pacific Northwest, not too hot in the summer, not too cold in the winter. And there's lots of mountains. Here we have it's not a real village. It is the set of a famous movie filmed there. If you know what it is, that's awesome. Lord of the Rings. Okay, let's keep going. All right, so we've got just a couple more slides left. Oceania is the name for a bunch of islands, like if you look, kind of south of Hawaii, that are in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, sometimes called the South Pacific. But where did it get its name? They're all in the ocean. And then within Oceania, there are several different groups. We have a group of islands called Micronesia, the tiny islands, Polynesia, the many islands, and Melanesia, the dark islands. And as you can see here, some of them are independent, but a lot of them are still colonies or protectorates of other countries like France, the British, the United States for Samoa, etc. Oceania is a pretty impoverished region. They get a lot of their economic, I wouldn't call it strength, but they get a lot of their economy is from aid and then trade or, natural resources. Also part of the Ring of Fire. Tropical, very tropical, so hot, humid, and also somewhat dry because they really have, some of these islands are so small, they have to wait and get rainfall from typhoons and etc. Okay, so that has to do with the physical geography. Now, the political geography of this region, we're not going to spend a ton of time on this because it is so diverse. So Australia is a continent and a country. It's also a commonwealth. It's part of countries that used to be colonized by Britain that are still formally attached to each other. They have the Queen of England, the Queen on their money. Technically, the Queen is still their queen, etc. New Zealand, its own country. Many South Pacific or oceanic islands are really small. The biggest, Papua New Guinea and Fiji, have 7 million and 800,000 respectively. Most of them are way smaller. And then Antarctica, which is kind of a weird, a bunch of different countries like claim to Antarctica. But because of the mineral wealth, people have a strong interest in making sure they're there when the Antarctic Treaty expires so that they can get oil, any sort of natural resources that are available there. For now, though, only people are only allowed there for scientific reasons. Cultural geography, very diverse, lots of diversity. There's indigenous people that we see here, and these are the Maori of New Zealand. This is in Australia. We have Aborigine kids and what look to be European kids of European descent. So a lot of diversity in terms of cultures in this region. So it kind of varies. This is Sydney, not the capital of Australia, but the biggest city. It's very cosmopolitan, kind of, aside from the wildlife outside of its borders, it would be like visiting London or New York or any other first world wealthy city. Other places, like down this picture below in the Oceania, there is a lot of poverty. And if you look at these buildings, if a tropical storm came, a lot of these people would be very vulnerable. All right, and last slide 18, cultural geography, where indigenous people, I talked about that a little bit earlier. And then be able for your, get it off me. I love you though. Sorry. Okay, so for the know the names of the indigenous people of Australia and New Zealand. Aborigine for Australia, New Zealand, Maori. Like for the United States, it would be Native Americans. And then also know the White Australia policy. Okay, that's all. Again, next week, I'll have this posted. We're not going to watch a video or anything, so I'll have this for Latin America, which we're doing next week. I'll have a video posted on Tuesday morning or Monday night. And again, we have Hannah, Callie, Jorge, Jordan, Eileen. Don't touch that. Dakota and Avi. All right, if you have questions, email me. Great.